morning, everybody. This morning I'm going to be giving you a workshop on how each of us can contribute to building a respectful workplace. So the focus is on building respect for everyone. Now, this is a very important workshop that has been triggered because of changes that have happened in WorkSafe British Columbia, and I'm going to go through those in a minute. I'm going to tell you a little bit about those changes and why they're so important. But before I do that, I want to explain to you that from my perspective, and given where I've come from, and I'll outline that a little bit for you as well, this is far more important, not from a legal perspective per se, but from a human perspective. And for each of you who has had conflict in the workplace at any point, it doesn't have to be in your current workplace, but in your past, you will know that it is one of the most trying, difficult experiences you have had. It is far more challenging than any work strategy or environment that's been put in front of you. It is very much what I call a 24/7 problem. Unlike project concerns, operational concerns, performance concerns, workplace conflict and dysfunction, whether you're the recipient, whether you're a bystander, whether you're someone who just happens to be working in the same area as the conflict, is exhausting and difficult for everyone. So although today's workshop has been triggered by changes in the law and changes with WorkSafe BC, I am passionate about it because I think it's very, very important for each of you on both a personal and a professional basis. So who am I anyways, and why am I telling you all of this? I think that's very important so that you can put my comments into context. My name is Marli Rusen, and my background is in law and psychology. So before running workshops like this and preparing videos like this, I engaged in workplace conflict and dysfunction from a very defensive, reactive basis. I was a litigator. I defended grievances and arbitrations and human rights complaints, and was at WorkSafe, again, for one side or the other in a very adversarial positional perspective and context. And what I noticed when I was there was that the process itself was so damaging that although it was set up to resolve conflict, in fact, it damaged people even more. And even if an individual wanted human rights or they wanted a grievance arbitration, it was a hollow victory because they often had to return to a workplace that was more exhausting, more toxic, more unhealthy than before that formal resolution process was even put into place. I also learned and heard from a number of employees and supervisors and managers that the conflict was very challenging, but the process itself was one of the worst experiences of their lives because they felt that our justice system and our defensive reactive system wasn't necessarily about solving the problem. It was about setting up strategy to win the case. So at the end of the day, even a win didn't solve the day-to-day dysfunction in the workplace, and in fact created more positions, more camps, and more cliques. So today's workshop is really going to be very practical and very focused on what you need as an employee or as a supervisor in interior health. So that is where my passion comes from, and that is the basis for the workshop that we're going to be doing this morning. So I'm going to start with the law, and then I'm going to switch to humanity, and then I'm going to give you some practical tips. That's the basic framework of today's workshop. So the law, what's happening right now? WorkSafe made two different very significant changes that impact you as a frontline worker in two different time periods. So I'm going to talk to you first about July 2012. And in July 2012, WorkSafe said, we're not just going to consider claims that have to do with physical injury in the workplace. We now realize that safety in the workplace encompasses psychological safety. And if people come to work on a day-to-day basis, and as a result of what's going on, they are impacted psychologically and they are injured psychologically, we as WorkSafe are going to accept a claim for benefits in the same way as we do if someone in the course of their employment slips and falls or injures themselves in any other physical way. So they set up a change in the legislation, Workers' Compensation Act, that said you can claim benefits if you suffer from a mental disorder, which is key. I'm going to talk to you about that in a minute. That is caused by a significant workplace stressor. I'm going to talk to you about that in a minute. With some exceptions, and I'm going to talk about those as well. Now, the mental disorder has to be a mental illness. Many of us have misunderstood this legislation and have misunderstood the fact that if we're feeling bad, we can go off on WorkSafe and claim benefits. Feeling bad is a personal reaction and a personal experience, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have a mental disorder. So a mental disorder has to be diagnosed by a psychologist or a psychiatrist. The WorkSafe people will not accept a claim from a walk-in clinic or a claim from your family physician. It has to be assessed thoroughly by someone who has a specialty in evaluating whether your feeling bad actually translates into a mental disorder. So that's very key. A lot of individuals have said, mistakenly, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling overloaded, I've got workload issues, other people are away, I don't think I can cope because of all this workload and these deadlines, I'm going to go off on WorkSafe. And you have to realize something, stress is not a mental illness. If it was a mental illness, I think all of us would be off work, quite frankly, because I think we're all stressed. I think that is just the world we live in right now. You also have to realize that stress itself is often a good thing. Olympians achieve gold medals because they have a positive stress and adrenaline in them that helps them be the best they can be. So I think stress gets a really bad rap in our culture, and there's a misunderstanding surrounding it. Now, stress itself can trigger in negative situations a mental disorder. The mental disorder would be chronic depression that you might be diagnosed with, or post-traumatic stress disorder, situational anxiety disorder. But for individuals to speak of going off on stress leave is a mistaken understanding of stress and a mistaken understanding of what an official mental disorder constitutes. So I think that's an important distinction that we have to understand. The second important point with respect to this is a significant workplace stressor that was explicitly mentioned in WorkSafe was bullying and harassment. So they have acknowledged as a very important legal body in British Columbia that bullying and harassment in the workplace can cause mental disorders. And that's a significant shift in British Columbia. Prior to this, we really haven't had any legislation that has acknowledged bullying and harassment in the workplace or has acknowledged that it can get so bad that it can result in psychological harm and injury that requires compensation. So this is a big shift in our law. Now, what WorkSafe has acknowledged as well, though, is that there is quite a misunderstanding about what bullying and harassment is. So a number of people think that if they're getting disciplined, or if they have constructive feedback, or if they are upset with the supervisor's direction, they feel so bad and they're so mad, they're feeling bad, they're so mad, that must be bullying. They're feeling it, so it must be. And as I'm going to talk to you a little bit later in more detail, bullying and harassment is an objective evaluation by a third party such as myself, who can come in, look at all the objective evidence, and determine whether it's bullying or harassment. And I'll explain a little bit later how I do that. But what I want you to know for now is that what WorkSafe said in July 2012, right in the legislation, is that bullying and harassment does not include performance management. It does not include supervisory direction. It doesn't include discipline, even up to termination. So it's acknowledging that while you might feel badly about that, indeed you might even get a mental disorder as a result of that. They've put in a legislative exemption in saying you will not get compensation or benefits if it's triggered by performance management. Now, a key issue that all of you have to understand, though, is that there's performance management, and then there's how you're being performance managed. So WorkSafe certainly will not look at a letter of reprimand you got and start evaluating whether you really should have seen more patients on a particular day, or you really should have talked to that patient with more respect and kindness. They're not going to start looking behind a supervisor's evaluation of your performance. What they will consider, however, is how that supervisor talked to you during the course of the meeting. Did they talk to you in a demeaning, belittling way? Did they talk to you in front of other people? Did they run you down to others without you being there? That is all an environmental issue. That's not a performance issue. That's all, are you being performance managed in a respectful way? And if your environment is affected, not by the management, but by how it's happening, then WorkSafe will definitely look into it. So that's an important distinction, I think, that employees and supervisors need to keep in mind. Performance management, in and of itself, not bullying and harassment. But if it's delivered in a disrespectful way, in a way that makes people objectively and subjectively feel humiliated or demeaned or belittled, that's when WorkSafe will step in and say, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? So those are the key elements of the legislative change that you need to know if you think that you have been bullied or harassed, and if you have been diagnosed with a mental disorder, that's when you should be thinking about WorkSafe BC and what could be available to you. So that's on the claims side. I just want to explain that with WorkSafe, there are two different situations. There's the claims and there's prevention. So what I just described to you for July 2012 was the claims side, just so you're aware of that. The prevention division then said in the next year, November 2013, you know, as WorkSafe and as a body that is passionate about prevention, why aren't we looking at bullying and harassment in a way that doesn't just compensate victims of it, but says to organizations like Interior Health and any other employer in BC, what are you doing to stop it in the first place? It's one thing to talk about compensating people who have gone through it and acknowledging their experience, but fundamentally, what steps can everybody, not just a manager or a supervisor or a director, but frontline workers as well, what steps can each of us take to prevent it from happening in the first place? So as a result of that, they consulted with unions and employers and workers throughout British Columbia, and they designed 3 policies, all focused on prevention. The main one for all of the employees out there is the workers' policy. And it has 3 different components that I think you should be aware of that will impact you on a day-to-day basis, because this very much is the law. This comes from Workers' Compensation Act. It's a policy under it, and it's not whether you feel like complying with it or not. It's a question of the fact that you absolutely do, and I'll give you some strategies on how. So the first thing that WorkSafe says to everybody, anyone who's a worker in any organization, you have a right not to be bullied or harassed. So the first one is about rights. Not to be bullied or harassed by other workers, so your colleagues, by supervisors, so any supervisor or manager, by anyone else who is working on behalf of the employer, so that would include contractors and anybody else on site. And then they say, or by any other person. So that would include visitors, it would include family members, it would include patients, it would include any members of the public. WorkSafe has defined the possible reason for your bullying or harassment in a very broad way. So that's critical. And I think that's an expansion for a lot of people who are saying, wait a minute, are you telling us that we have a right not to be bullied by individuals who don't work here? And we say, absolutely, that's what WorkSafe is doing. How that looks and how that will shake down in a certain situation will very much depend. It's not like we can start issuing letters of discipline to patients as they're lying in their beds, but it's about addressing their behavior towards workers in Interior Health to make sure that they are respectful and not abusive or in any way intimidating or demeaning or belittling of the people who are providing care or services to them. So that's a big change. Now, we all like to focus on our rights. It feels so great. What else am I entitled to? What are my other rights? Tell me, tell me, tell me. But unfortunately, or fortunately from my perspective, with every right comes a responsibility. And sometimes we forget that while we really want a respectful workplace, and my goodness, are we ever entitled to it, and we deserve it, and we're so excited about the fact that WorkSafe has said we have a right not to be bullied or harassed, the bottom line is we need to stop to think about what our responsibilities are. So that's the second part of the policy. And that says every worker, it's like the flip side of the coin, every worker who is here, worker, supervisor, manager, has an obligation not to bully or harass anybody else. So, interesting, not to bully or harass your workers or your colleagues, not to bully or harass your supervisors, anyone working on behalf of the employer, or anyone else. So, just what you expect is what is expected of you. It's the flip side of the coin. Now, it's interesting. People say, well, worker to worker, what's going on here? And I can tell you that in my experience as a lawyer and as a workplace harassment investigator, I'm getting far more complaints of employees to employees bullying each other on teams, in between teams, you name it. So it's becoming far more common in the workplace than many people realize. Then people go further and they say to me, did we hear you right? Are you saying that workers can't bully supervisors? You know, we understood that supervisors couldn't bully workers. That's absolute, but what are you talking about? And I call it the elephant in the room because I have been an investigator for incredible, challenging and complex investigations. I've met a number of different frontline staff and supervisors and managers, and I can tell you that a number of supervisors out there right now are being bullied by very intimidating and very aggressive frontline staff. Not many of them. They're often small in number, but they're highly influential on their team, and they can act in very inappropriate ways, and they have over a course of years. And in fact, they become so accustomed to what I say, effectively managing their departments, that they end up doing whatever they can to whomever they can to maintain that influential power, regardless of their actual position in an organization. So WorkSafe's acknowledged that and said, you know what, it doesn't matter about the organizational chart. It doesn't matter that someone might be up here and someone is down here. If this person is acting in a way that makes this person feel terrible about themselves and humiliates them and belittles them and campaigns against them, this worker is responsible for the disrespectful environment, and this worker needs to be held accountable. So, you know, WorkSafe has really blown this open and has said it's a one-size-fits-all policy. If we truly want a respectful workplace, everybody has to be respectful to everybody else. And I see that that's very, very important because I have an expression that I use, and it's one that I call looking for the loophole to kindness. And it's fascinating. It's almost like a game show for me when I interview employees and I interview supervisors and professionals. First of all, this isn't really difficult. It's not a high standard that any of us have to meet. The standard is 2 words. I mean, I know we have lots of policy and we've got a lot of law. It's called be kind. It's really not a huge challenge, and it's not something that a rocket scientist needs to really help us with. Be kind. But yet, many individuals and organizations look for loopholes to kindness. Well, I'm the director of the department, so although there are a number of rules for my staff, I've earned the right to be abrupt and rude and dismissive and inconsiderate because, you know what, I am who I am. Or I have people who have said, look at the seniority list. Check out this seniority list. I am the most senior person in this department, so I get to treat the people that are junior to me, and especially those auxiliaries or casuals or part-timers, who knows what. People are always looking for a distinction from who they are to who they work with. And if they are deemed to be lower than them, then they decide they get to treat them however they want. And many of my investigations are brought on by junior employees against senior employees because of some incredible examples of disrespect by senior people on the team or senior individuals on the team, to let people know, to remind them of their place in the organization. And again, no loophole to kindness. Your seniority doesn't matter. Your status in terms of whether you're an executive director. It's interesting. People say, I am the top surgeon in the world. Well, that's amazing. And let's give you an award for the fact that you're a top surgeon. And in fact, when I'm a patient, I will desperately want to come to you. But being the top surgeon in the world doesn't give you a license to dump all over the nurses and the others on your medical team because somehow your qualifications give you a license to treat other people poorly. Again, looking for the loophole to kindness. So WorkSafe has said it doesn't matter what your status is. It doesn't matter if you're an employee or a physician or a doctor on staff, or if you're a custodian, or if you're a porter. It doesn't matter. You all have to show each other basic kindness and respect. So that's essentially what the responsibilities are for workers. The final part of the worker policy that you need to know is that everybody has a responsibility to report. What I mean by that is WorkSafe has said if you are experiencing what you think to be bullying and harassment, you have to come forward. And Interior Health has devised a brand new policy that gives you a number of different options. You can come forward to the person, you can come forward to your supervisor. You need to come forward responsibly, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, to anybody within the processes in the policy that can help you solve the problem. So the reporting function is very important. When I look back historically, the policy used to say, here's what you can do, and here are the options available to you. WorkSafe has bumped it up a notch and said, you know what, this is what you must do. If you think you are experiencing this, you must come forward and report it to someone who can help you with this situation. Interestingly, they've also taken it another level, and they said, so if you are the victim, or so you think, that's one thing. But if you are a bystander and you have observed what you think to be bullying and harassment, you also have to come forward. That's a significant shift in the law. Even when I look at human rights and I look at labor laws and I look at other laws, we haven't focused on bystander responsibilities to the degree that, in my view, we should be focusing on. Bystanders are pretty powerful people. They're not the ones in the conflict, but they certainly are the ones that have the eyes and the ears of the conflict, because many times this happens when supervisors or managers are away from the work site or the work area. And this is the first time that the bystanders are held responsible for coming forward to report their observations. And I say, and this is a legal term, Yahoo. And why do I say that? Because in my experience with my investigations, bystanders know a ton of information, and they walk away and they say, not my problem, not my responsibility, and more importantly, I am not going to get involved. And in some respects, fair enough. You know, you're scared to get involved because you don't want to be the next one. You don't want to be the next target. So sometimes you even look like you are befriending the bully or standing beside the bully. You're certainly not standing up to the bully because you don't want to get on their radar. And while I have some empathy for that, the bottom line is that if you are in any way in a situation where you're observing it, you're experiencing it, you know something's not on, and you are not coming forward to put an end to it, you need to understand that you are part of the problem. You're not part of the solution. That's the bottom line. So WorkSafe has said that's the way it is, and they have said that bystanders have to come forward as well. So those are key for you. Just just so you're aware, the other two policies, and I won't spend a lot of time on them because I want to give you some practical strategies moving forward, is a supervisory policy and an employer policy. So I spent a lot of time on the worker policy because that's really key to you. But for all of you who are also supervisors or acting supervisors or managers, you need to know that not only is the worker policy applicable to you because you're workers, and so interesting, the bystander policy is just as applicable to supervisors and managers who are out there and see other supervisors and managers acting in an inappropriate way, and they too are standing back and not doing anything about it. So bear that in mind because I know that happens all too frequently. But separate from that, what WorkSafe is saying, any supervisor out there who is in charge of any work unit at any point in time has an obligation to monitor the work site and manage out, shut down, end bullying and harassment or potential bullying and harassment. Now, this isn't significantly new in law. This expectation has been there for a few years now, but it's never been codified in black and white in legislation. It's come up in human rights cases, it's come up in grievance arbitrations, but it's never been part of a law per se. Now it's there in black and white saying the supervisors have to get on board with not only not engaging in bullying and harassment, but making sure to manage it out within their team and specifically hold people accountable. And I have to say that accountability is the one piece that has been missing in respectful workplace environment work for a number of years. We've all been so great at developing beautiful policies. I love the font. I like how nicely it's all laid out. We've been great at giving you training sessions after training sessions after training sessions. But then when people are not following the policy and they're not acting respectfully, we've dropped the ball on holding them accountable. And I want to talk to you about that because it's a cultural thing where I find that effectively we are excusing the inexcusable. And it goes with not holding people accountable. So what do? And we all do it, but when supervisors and managers do it now, they are going to be holding themselves open to more exposure than in the past. And so will employees and bystanders as well. We say, that's just so-and-so. How many times have we said that? We have a difficult colleague or a difficult boss, and they make us walk on eggshells. We're feeling really anxious. We dread coming into work. And either we say it to ourselves or we report it to someone. And what do they say? Oh, you're new here. That person's been here a long time. You just got to get used to them. That's just the way they are. They've always been that way. And they're always going to be that way. But they make me cry, we say back. But we're scared. I feel sick to my stomach. I dread having to talk to them. I know. If it makes you feel any better, so do all of us. We all feel the very same way, so we're all kind of sick to our stomachs, but, strength in numbers, strength in numbers. It's nuts, is what I say. I don't know if that's a mental disorder, but it's nuts, because we are essentially condoning and enabling people for behaving in a way they just should not be behaving in a workplace. And I always say, the workplace isn't your living room, and the workplace isn't your kitchen. The workplace is a workplace, and everybody has to give each other basic civility and respect. There's no such thing as I'm not going to talk to you. I hate you so much, but I'm not going to be disrespectful, so you know what? I'm just not going to talk to you at all. No such thing. That is not civil. That is shunning. That is stonewalling. That is freezing people out. It's not civil. So it's not just what you're doing, but what you're not doing that can create this atmosphere of excusing the inexcusable. So this accountability piece is very important as well, because we have to stop this if we truly are going to have a substantive respectful workplace. I always say it's great to talk the talk, and we can have banners and pamphlets, and we can all have dancers going around going, yahoo, we love respect. But if we're not going to hold people accountable when they're disrespectful, then what's the point? So this is all about being real and being true. Now, that's the law. That's where I'm at. But I want to just talk very briefly about the human experience. So in my work as a lawyer, as a harassment investigator, as someone who does environmental scans of different departments and health authorities throughout the British Columbia and other workplaces, I have the privilege of people sharing with me in a very vulnerable way on a day-to-day basis their experience and the impact of disrespectful conduct to them. And it's a real, horrible, awful thing. So it's about people that literally throw up every morning because they're anxious about coming in, because they're an outcast, or because they're repeatedly embarrassed or shamed in front of people that they work with. It's about people that cringe at the thought of having to work yet another day, but feel that they've got no option because they've got a family to feed. Often they have less than transferable skills, and they just don't know where to turn. So I can give you story after story about people being physically ill, mental illness. I've been involved with suicides where people just haven't managed the situation, haven't heard people, and they felt they had nowhere to turn. So this is not about complying with WorkSafe because that's the legal thing to do. It's about complying with WorkSafe because it's the right thing to do. Nobody deserves to be treated meanly anywhere, quite frankly, but in the workplace. We all come, we all have a responsibility to do our work, and we all have a responsibility to do our work in a way that facilitates others doing their work as well. So when I said a little bit earlier that it's a 24/7 issue, what I meant by that is we all take this home with us. People that are being disrespected repeatedly or being bullied or being harassed, they go home and they're thinking about this constantly. They're talking with their spouses. They are up at 2 a.m. repeating the conversation that happened in their head. They're up at 3 a.m. preparing for the conversation that's about to happen the next day. It is not a situation that can be turned off. And people who are in this often have marital breakdowns. They often find that their kids say that they were lost for a little while. You come home and you go, but you're not hearing anyone. You're not engaged with anyone. You're just on survival mode because you're feeling like there's nowhere to turn. So I am passionate about this, not from a legal compliance perspective, but from a very human, very fundamental perspective, that no one deserves to be treated this way. So a key part of the employer policy that is related to that is that everybody has an obligation not only not to bully or harass each other, but to prevent bullying and harassment in the first place. So I'm going to give you a diagram and talk to you a little bit about what the difference is. It's called dealing with it at the dot. And here's the dot. It's going to make sense in a few minutes, trust me. Here's a dot, and here is TW, which is a train wreck, essentially. The dot is disrespectful behavior. Big T, we don't want to forget that. That happens in every workplace. So I guess what I want to say first of all is, don't think that the dot or conflict is a stigma. Every workplace, every organization, every environment has dot-like behavior happening. And it can be inconsiderate behavior, just people being thoughtless about other people. It can be disruptive behavior, where the behavior really does affect somebody's focus and concentration in the workplace. It can just be that behavior that I call, what were they thinking behavior, really. It's all about them. They're not thinking about the impact of their behavior or their words on other people, about the storm that they bring with them on a day-to-day workplace. What were they thinking kind of behavior? And what you have to know is that if you take that kind of behavior, happens every workplace, day in and day out, and you add time to it, and then you add a little bit of inaction, so employees aren't doing anything, bystanders aren't doing anything, supervisors are ignoring it. It's that we look down and we pretend we don't see it, then we don't have to do anything about it. La, 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 I can't hear you. If we do all of that, we get a train wreck, an absolute train wreck. And I'm usually involved here in harassment investigations, in lawsuits, in people who've had to go off on long-term disability, in coroner's inquests because a death has been considered in part related to workplace dynamics. So the train wreck can come in many different forms. It can come in a team dysfunction form where you have constant turnover, constant sick leave. You can't get anyone to stay and you don't know why, but it's all ugliness. Some of it's operational ugliness and some of it's human ugliness, but it's ugly. What's key about this diagram is it's one-way street. You can't go from a train wreck up to the environment you had beforehand. So your power lies in dealing with disrespectful behavior when it happens, as soon as it happens, instead of allowing it to fester and build until over the course of time you are at the train wreck. Because often I'm called in at the train wreck to investigate it, or after the train wreck, and I have to spend months with organizations to rebuild trust and to rebuild communication. Because if you let it get here, people have shut down. There's camps, there's cliques, there's nobody trusting anyone, and yet this very same team is relied on for quality and safe patient care. Very, very risky, dangerous situation. So I want you to focus up here. Now, a lot of people say to me, Marli, what is disrespectful behavior? What do you mean? And while I can give you some examples of the behaviors themselves, they come out more interestingly when I describe to you some of the personalities that I discover through my environmental scans and my harassment investigations from the descriptions provided by people like you. So this isn't from a textbook, this isn't from my law school study, this is coming from people like you who have to live with these people on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to give you a description. The first person is Aggressive Andy. Now, Aggressive Andy, I also called Pecs Boy, because Aggressive Andy, metaphorically or symbolically, his pecs are over here, and his pecs come in the door 5 minutes before he does. So he's like this, and then the rest of his body comes in. Because you know what? According to Andy, he's all that in a bag of chips. And as long as he's at the meeting can get started. And when he leaves the meeting, there's no need for it to continue. It's his ideas or the highway. You know that, my way or the highway. He takes over meetings. He takes over team projects. And he sabotages any kind of change that could threaten the status quo as defined by him. Now, what is concerning with Andy is that the Andys of the world very much silence the rest of the team. People are scared of Andy. You know what? Supervisors and managers are scared of Andy. Now, sometimes Andys might be supervisors and managers, which even complicates it more. But the bottom line is, what happens when Andy speaks at a meeting? People nod. They nod. Did they agree? Absolutely not. When I'm meeting with them on one-on-ones, they don't agree with him at all. Are they going to challenge him? Absolutely not. Because they don't want his next project to be them. So they just are silent. Many of them are brilliant. This can happen with groups of physicians and groups of nurses and groups of other healthcare professionals, where you have a bunch of brilliant people in a room, and you have one or two aggressive Andys, and they take over. So as a result, you don't get that exchange of information, you don't get the challenges and the debates. You end up with a culture of mediocrity rather than a culture of excellence. So it's very much up to employees, but more importantly, supervisors and managers, to work with their team to moderate the Andys of the world. And what you have to be careful of is making assumptions about Andy. When Andy says, hey, we are so not in favor of this new policy. We have a ton of issues with what you think you're doing around here. Careful. The Andys exploit the term we. They often don't have any representational value. They often don't even have the people standing behind them. Well, they're standing behind them, but they're standing way behind them because they're hiding. So they use we to leverage their opinion, but it's actually not based on the fact that the rest of the team agrees with them. So, whether you're in a leadership position or otherwise, be very cautious about the Andys of the world, because what they say in terms of the backing that they have might be different. Or I spoke to so-and-so at another health authority and they agree with me. They think that this is crazy. Sometimes they don't even name the person at the health authority. That's interesting. Or they do name them, and then when you go and check back with that person, the spin is completely different. So I just say be very cautious. But more importantly, from a move forward basis, the Andys have to be managed. Nobody should be enabling Andys of the world. People should be speaking up either to Andy or to their supervisor or to human resources to say, I have great ideas and I'm not coming forward. Or I'm walking on eggshells when I have to work with Andy, because you never know what the next cause is that he or she is championing. And it's done often in a very loud, abrasive way. It's also very intimidating for people when Andy's in the room and Andy disagrees with you. Because Andy took a course probably a few years ago, probably from the employer, and someone said, you know what, with respectful workplace, we don't want you to call people idiots. We don't want you to call them jerks or stupid or they don't know what they're talking about. And Andy took that very literally. Andy wrote that down, filed it away. So what Andy does now is sits there in the meeting like this. Is Andy saying anything? No, Andy's not saying a word. Is Andy saying anything? Not at all. Rolling his eyes, looking at his watch, looking at his smartphone, checking his tablet, doing anything he can, laughing, saying something sarcastic, and then saying as a joke, oh, was that my outside voice? I mean, this is the new 2014 way of doing it. Doing whatever they can to throw the other person off their game and to really shut down the ideas. And so when I talk to the people who receive that message from Andy, they're mad. They're mad on a couple of levels. One, Andy's calling them an idiot. We all know Andy's calling them an idiot, but Andy's doing it in a subversive, passive-aggressive way. More importantly, now they say, does Andy think I'm an idiot and I'm stupid? Does Andy not realize that I know exactly what Andy's doing? So it's a very, very frustrating, intimidating environment. That's up here. We're not even at a train wreck yet. But if you leave Andy alone and you leave Andy alone and you leave Andy alone, you're going to get a formal complaint of harassment and bullying, or you're going to get people who have to take a medical leave, or you're going to get a situation where the stars on the team leave and say, done with Andy. Andy can stay here and control this unit. I'm going to another one. So that's the first personality that I deal with, and that gives you some ideas of some of that meeting behavior that can be really rude, the nonverbal behavior, the rolling of the eyes. I call it eyes and sighs because it's doing things that are nonverbal, that really are disrespectful, that can be more disrespectful than choosing some disrespectful language. The second one's a little more difficult and far more prevalent, and I call it holding jello. The second one is Moody Martha or Moody Mark. Moody Martha or Moody Mark, because gender doesn't matter for Andy or Martha or anyone else, comes to work every day with a different mood. It's almost like a game show, and it would be fun if it wasn't so trying on everybody. And so you have to check the day. The first 15 minutes of every day is used up by people watching Martha to see what kind of mood she's going to be in. Is it a good day or is it a bad day? Is it a making eye contact with Martha day, or is it making sure we avoid Martha? There's workarounds, there's creeping quietly when she's having a bad day, and then there's making sure you engage with her and communicate clearly with her when she's having a good day. So it's quite exhausting. I can tell you that some people look out the window and they wait for Martha to arrive, and they watch Martha's walk from the hallway to the desk, and they can know in 30 seconds, I'm not kidding you, they've gotten it down to a science. They can know by the way Martha's walking, by the way she's breathing, by her facial expression, how they're all gonna do that day. So I call the Marthas of the world people that hold other people emotional hostage. They bring their personal issues and agendas into the workplace and then force other people to have to cope with whatever personality comes in. That's quite exhausting for people, and again, it leaves them on edge. This is one area, one personality, one disrespectful behavior that we really allow to happen through enabling. And you can tell when you're enabling someone because you start to whisper about why they are the way they are. So, oh my goodness, did you see Martha today? She came in, she was storming. You could hear her heels 3 minutes away. And then she came in and she took her stuff and she went boom with her work. Sighed and went, oh, did you see that? And they went, I know. But here comes when the enabling comes. I think she's having trouble getting pregnant. Really? So you can do that. Or, I think her son's on drugs. Or, I think she's going through a really bad time with her divorce right now. So there's a list, right? We can do an Excel spreadsheet with the number of reasons we want to excuse someone stomping around and sighing and making everybody else's day theirs. And what I say is, it's disrespectful dot behavior that hasn't been called out for years and needs to be called out now. And what I often say with that is that, quite frankly, we all have a ton of stuff going on in our lives. Let's not kid ourselves. We've got our divorces and our pressures and our family obligations, and we've got our own illnesses. But none of those are a license to create a toxic work environment for others in the workplace. None of them. If you need time off, absolutely. There are provisions in your collective agreement or your contract for that. There's benefit plans, there's family counseling, there's a ton of different supports out there to help people get through their infertility or their menopause or their divorce, whatever it is. But what we shouldn't do is say, because of that, you have to be treated horribly and you're just going to have to cope. So it's a real shift that we have to make as a result. So that's Moody Martha. The next one is Perfectionist Pat. Perfectionist Pat is often a top performer in his or her field and is often a high producer, good at their job substantively. A great technician is what I would call them. And if interior health standard is here, Perfectionist Pat standard is there, right? Very high standard. And Pat meets the standard. And in fact, Pat is very hard on Pat to begin with. So let's be clear about that. But what Perfectionist Pat does is decides that regardless of what his or her classification is, they're going to manage everybody else to make sure they meet Pat's standard as well. And they huddle around and they hover around and they're constantly monitoring their colleagues and their coworkers, and they always have an editorial about why they're doing it better, why they're our top producer, why these people should just do it and meet the standard that Pat has set. Very exhausting for people. I was just doing a team facilitation yesterday, and people talked about the fact that the Pats of the world monitor people's start and end times in the workplace, their break times, whether their sick leave is valid or not. They go on Facebook and they do their own little investigation to see what Pat might be doing when Pat's off on leave. They take it upon themselves to enmesh themselves in someone else's world, in someone else's working relationship with IH, when quite frankly, and with respect, it's none of their business. The bottom line is employees have an employment relationship with IH, not with their colleagues. If their colleagues have concerns about their performance or about their productivity, that needs to be respectfully passed over to a supervisor or a manager to deal with. But employees should not be taking this on and should not be persistently managing each other and in a very disrespectful, toxic way. So that's a third one. The final one I want to tell you about isn't so much an interpersonal dot behavior as much as it is one that creates the most, in my opinion and experience, team dysfunction and low morale. So when I look at low engagement scores throughout British Columbia in a number of workplaces, this person, combined with the other three people I just talked to you about, is the cause. This person is negative Norm or negative Nancy. And we've all had them in our lives. Sometimes they've been employees, and then sometimes, heaven forbid, they can be family members. Negative Norm and negative Nancy just complain incessantly. Complain. It doesn't even have to be necessarily about work. If the courier is late, if the photocopy machine broke down, if they inadvertently scheduled 2 people off when only 1 person should be off. It's the theme of the day. And anybody who crosses negative Norm or negative Nancy's path hears about the courier, the photocopier, the workload, the people who have called in sick. It's constant. And those of you who know Disney know that, Eeyore is the fundamental negative norm, right? Eeyore can't get happy to save his life. And there are a ton of Eeyores out there right now walking around, and instead of servicing patients and colleagues, they're looking for their tail. Oh, how's it going, Bob? Oh, you don't even want to ask. And you know what? You don't want to ask, because it's about 15 to 20 minutes of why the world is terrible and the workplace is horrible. And the negative norms and negative Nancys are very destructive to team integrity. First of all, the negativity is contagious. So if you hang out with enough negative people for long enough, you start to become negative. And yesterday at the team meeting, this one gentleman got up and said, "You got it, Marli. This place is negative. And I have to tell you, when I got here, I was positive, I was enthusiastic, I couldn't wait to begin. And now I look around and I've become one of them." So it's almost like Star Trekian or the Borg, where if you spend enough time together, you all become one, and it's all this negative force. And it's not fun. It's actually not fun for the negative people. It's exhausting, it's draining, it's fatiguing, and it really is the cause of dread for many people coming to work. So again, that's dot behavior that all of us should be aware of, so that we don't engage in it, we don't enable it. And if we're supervisors or managers, we really have to start holding people accountable. I say, when you come to work, you fake it till you make it. And I have an expression. I say, you know what? We should take a baggage cart from Air Canada, and we should place it at the front doors of every interior health work site. And we should have a sign saying, "Leave your baggage here." Because whether your baggage is personal, or it's negative, or it's a narcissistic, whatever it is, you gotta leave it at the door. Do your basic respect, put a smile on your face, even if it looks like you're constipated, and get to work, because that's all we need of you, and that's what we expect of you. So those are the dot behaviors that I think you really need to know about. Now, I want to give you some strategies on what to do if you are in this situation, and I'm going to end off with that, but I want to give you a key description of what you need to know for bullying and harassment. And what I mean by that is that there's some misunderstandings out there about bullying and harassment that go beyond the performance management that I talked to you about earlier. One of the misunderstandings is that if I feel harassed, I must be harassed. If I'm feeling badly, I must be getting bullied or harassed. I want to show you something. The law on bullying and harassment is an objective one. The test is an objective one. It's not whether you feel it, it's whether you actually are being bullied or harassed. And it's based on what we call in law the reasonable person standard. So if you have 2 people who are in the middle of a conflict, and this person thinks this person is bullying or harassing them, the fact they think that doesn't mean the person actually is. This person is having an experience that could be valid. They have a perspective that could be valid, but it's up to me or another investigator to determine objectively whether there's evidence of demeaning, belittling, intimidating behavior. So it has to be objective, and I'm not looking at whether X is being harassed by Y. I'm saying, does a reasonable person in X's position think that they would be harassed by Y once they hear what Y is doing to them? So in many situations I investigate, X says Y is doing 1, 2, and 3. Often Y will say, yes, I am, and that's not bullying or harassment. Or Y will say, I didn't do that at all, and let me give you my perspective or my experience. So both of their experiences are equally valid and need to be weighed accordingly. But sometimes Y will say, yes, I did it. And that doesn't mean that Y has bullied or harassed them. So the best way to understand a reasonable person standard is, let's pretend we're going out there and we're at the parking lot. of one of our interior health sites. And we stop someone and we say, okay, we're not going to tell you the department, but we're going to give you a description of what's going on in there right now. There's X and there's Y. And Y apparently did this and this and this and this. Do you think that in 2014, in British Columbia, what Y did is demeaning, belittling, and intimidating behavior? Do you think that, having heard this whole story? And you hear what that person in the parking lot has to say. And take 100 people in the parking lot. What do they have to say? You eventually develop the reasonable person standard. It's a community standard based on the year and based on the location. So the standard might be different in Europe. The standard might be different in Asia. We look at what the standard is in British Columbia in 2014. Now this is important because some people in our work site have probably gone through 2 or 3 different reasonable person standards because the standard probably wasn't the same in 1994 as it is right now, and certainly wasn't the same in 1984. We now have personal harassment, we have bullying, we have a number of different initiatives that didn't even exist in our policies then. And while I have some sympathy for people who have worked back then, the reality is that the only standard that applies now is 2014. So for people to say, this is the way we've always behaved here, and people better get on side with us because this is the way we do behave here, they don't understand that they actually have to keep up with the standard. The standard doesn't have to be modified for them. That's a really important distinction because I hear that in my finding the loophole to kindness. That's the way we do it here. This is our industry. This is the way we've always done it. Excuse after excuse after excuse. So what I want you to see is I've developed this feeling offensive scale so that you understand the difference between subjective, how you're feeling, and objective, what I have to determine as an investigator. And if there's a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to say somewhere between 4 to 6 is this reasonable person standard that I was telling you about earlier. That's I'll say the community standard, and that's fixed. That is whatever a court or a human rights tribunal or WorkSafe says in decision after decision after decision in terms of what's acceptable and what's not. So firm ones, for example, racism, sexism, comments about sexual orientation, physical disability, mental, all of those issues, firm. There's no wiggle room. You don't do that in 2014. Maybe that was different in 1974 and 1984. I'm not going to comment on that. I'm saying we have to focus on what's acceptable now. So here's the reasonable person standard. Okay, down here, subjectively, in terms of people's personalities, you have people that are never offended, ever. And they're very fun to party with, I can tell you that. You can say anything to these people, and they're like, yeah, that's so true, man. You can say, you are the fattest person I've ever met. Like, I've met a lot of fat people, but you are fat. And they're like, I know. I can't stop eating. I love food. They don't get hurt at all. I hope that shirt was on sale. That's all I can say is I'm hoping for your sake you bought that shirt on sale. I did. I got 5 of them. Can you believe it? I got 5 for $10. So they are fine with it. They're often telling jokes about themselves. They don't care what you say to them, and they don't care about the reasonable person standard. You can tell them jokes from back in the 70s, and they're like, okay with it. Here's the problem. The people who are at 1 sometimes treat other people at 1 as well because they can take it, so they dish it out. And if what they're saying doesn't meet with the 2014 standard, they get themselves into trouble. Now, it doesn't matter that they didn't intend it. It doesn't matter if they did it in with good spirits. They're not malicious. They just like to have a good time. They want everyone to party. All of that doesn't matter. If they cross this reasonable person standard when they open their mouths, they are going to be found liable for bullying and harassment. So they have to be careful, and we have to work them over to the 4 to 6. Then you have 10. The people at 10 are born offended. It started when the obstetrician smacked them and they got offended, saying, as babies, what are you smacking me for? They started to cry and they haven't stopped since. And they they have very particular ideas of what the workplace should be. They're not really into humor. They think smiling is a bit of an issue. They go around and have very stringent rules and regulations about people's behavior in the workplace. Again, they are far higher than the reasonable person standard, and they come to the supervisor again and again and again. This person's doing this, and this person's playing their radio too loud, and this person's humming, and I don't like humming. They've got a ton of different complaints, none of which are against the rules or law for our current workplace. And it's up to managers and supervisors to identify those people and to coach, counsel, or possibly even discipline them to getting to the place where they operate at 4 to 6 and they expect others to operate at 4 to 6. So people have different standards and expectations. I get it. And we have different levels of tolerance. I get that too. But in law, when I come in to investigate you and investigate your team, I have to see whether all of you are behaving in accordance with the 2014 standard. That is the bottom line. That's my mandate. So to finish off, I'm going to leave you with a couple of practical pointers on how you can take responsibility for your role in creating a respectful workplace environment. I have to tell you that the minute you open your mouth or send an email or a text or have a discussion, whatever, the minute you engage in some form of communication or interaction with someone, you are either making your environment better or worse. You're either working towards respect or you're working towards disrespect. So you have a choice. Regardless of the toxicity around you, you have an individual choice to decide how you are going to operate with respect to that. And that is why it is so important that when you have a conflict resolution program, you have to take the mirror out. While it's important that you're protected and you have a respectful workplace, you have to have some self-reflection to say, how have I contributed to the current situation, and how can I help turn the situation around? If you are a complainant, meaning someone who thinks they might have been bullied or harassed or being treated disrespectfully, or thinks they are part of a toxic or disrespectful workplace environment, there's an obligation for you to come forward. I say an ethical, moral, and legal obligation for you to come forward as soon as possible to address your concerns. If you can, I would really encourage you to start developing the ability to have a direct conversation with somebody without making it huge, heavy, complicated. If you can't, I totally get it. And I understand why. If you're feeling bullied by someone, the last thing you want to do is go and have a private conversation with someone about the fact that you're feeling bullied. So I get that. But in those circumstances, you involve a supervisor or human resources or someone else to say, hey, help me have that difficult conversation. I just need someone there. What I want you to do as a complainant is to take responsibility for bringing the problem to the organization's attention as soon as possible. What I don't want you to do is start to gossip about the other person. I don't want you to start talking about the other person and telling people what they are and what they're not doing. You're not the judge and jury. You're someone who's in the middle of a storm and needs help to get out of that storm. But you can't do that by creating a campaign of negativity against the person who you think is a bully in the workplace. Because by doing that, you become an element of the disrespect and the toxicity. So everybody deserves a right to be heard by an impartial person, and everybody deserves a right to correct their behavior. So if you are going around talking about people and journaling about them and documenting about them, gossiping, you are actually not giving them an opportunity to change and not allowing the organization to solve the problem for you and likely for other people on your team. So it's essential that you do whatever creative steps you can to come forward as quickly as possible. You know, I have to say again and again that when I do these investigations, I have people who've come to me with volumes and journals that are 4 years long, where they go home every night and they're having so much trouble that they're documenting what's going on. And I don't have any trouble with you documenting. What I have trouble with is you documenting and not speaking up, because that doesn't help you. You're living with the situation and journaling about it. And it's not helping the other person who's not journaling about it, but that might not even know you're feeling the way you're feeling. So we all have to be part of the solution. If you are a respondent, and by that I mean the person who is perceived to be the disrespectful agent in the workplace or the potential bully or harasser, I want you to realize that when someone comes to you to engage in a direct discussion with you, that's a gift. It doesn't feel like a gift. It feels awkward and gross, and you're going to get your back up, but it's a gift. I can tell you that when I talk to respondents in formal investigations, their wish was always, why didn't someone come to me sooner? Why did they wait to file a formal complaint against me? Why didn't they give me an opportunity to change before they went and filed this incredibly intense complaint? So knowing that now, what I'm going to say to you is if someone comes to you directly or if someone comes to you on someone's behalf, listen and try not to get defensive. And try to adjust your behavior for that person. Maybe that person's a 7 out of 10 on that offensive scale, maybe not. But in order to work with them, develop a negotiated relationship with them. What works for them, what works for you. Try to be practical. Try to bring some common sense to it. You want the problem to stop as soon as possible. Some of you are your own worst enemies. You get your backs up, you start to argue, and some even start doing the behavior even more. I call it the oh yeah phenomenon. Oh yeah, you don't like it when I hum? Guess what? I'm going to hum louder, more frequently, and I'm going to announce that I'm humming because I love to hum. So you take that knowledge, that vulnerability that someone shared with you, and you exploit it because you're feeling threatened or scared yourself, and you're really hurting yourself. So you got to be careful. If you're a bystander, whether you're an employee or a supervisor or a manager, when you're a bystander, you've got to do something. I mean, that's my fundamental message to bystanders is, my goodness, stop standing back and being part of the problem. My biggest advice to people is disrupt and distract. I don't want you coming in with a white horse and a veil, an anti-bullying veil. You don't need to start lecturing people. You don't need to start referring back to this lecture. You need to change the topic. If you're sitting in a lunchroom or you're at a work unit and there's tension and there's awkward situation going on, make something up. Get them out of the dynamic that they're currently in. Break it all up. You can use humor. You can use an excuse. You want to disrupt and distract the event. Some people say, well, I'll just leave. That's absolutely an option. But leaving on its own is still not taking responsibility for the situation. If you don't want to disrupt and distract yourself, you leave and then you go and seek support, immediate support. You go and you get a team leader, you get a supervisor, you say, hey, can you come and break this up? There's some awkward tension going on. I need some help. I need some backup and I need it now. So don't just leave, you leave and you get someone to help you with the disruption and the distraction. Now, what if that doesn't happen? This is all perfect world stuff. If that doesn't happen, what I want you to do later on that day is I want you to go to the complainant or to the respondent, depending on your comfort level, one or the other, and I want you to have a conversation with them. I don't want you to make assumptions that they are being bullied or harassed. In fact, these two people might have a relationship you don't know about. They might have gone to school with each other 20 years ago. They might get along. They might have a negotiated relationship that you're not aware of, so be careful that you don't superimpose your judgments without checking it out. The bystander should go to the complainant and say, hey, I saw that. Are you okay? First of all, check in on them. Do you need my support? And what does that support look like? So get your information and your guidance from the complainant themselves. If you are friends with the respondent, be a true friend as opposed to a fake friend. Fake friends walk away saying, hey, I'm buddies with them. I'm not going to get involved. True friends, take them out for a beer or take them to Subway for lunch. You can even buy the sandwich. And as you're eating there at lunch, say, hey, you know what, buddy? I'm hearing certain things going on in the unit. I'm hearing that so-and-so is not happy with what's happening. Or I was in the meeting, I saw what happened there, and I saw the look on that person's face. I don't know if you saw it, but she didn't look happy. She actually looked really hurt by whatever exchange you had. Help them be a mirror, like show them what you saw and help them avoid a formal complaint. I've had too many people avoid getting involved, which results in a formal complaint for this person. So if you can't go to the complainant or go to the respondent, you don't feel comfortable going to either, you go to a supervisor. or you go to human resources for coaching or guidance. You go somewhere, but you don't go home and put your head in the sand. That is what you don't do. That option is now off the list. Finally, if you're a supervisor, and supervisors, I'm going to give you some more guidance in a separate workshop, you have to do something. You have to have the back of your team. And so supervisors have to take action to look into this situation and to help these people get out of the quagmire that they're in. So, in closing, I know that I've provided a lot of different information from a lot of different angles. What I wanted to say to all of you is it's not about getting an A in university. It's not about being a perfect worker in perfect compliance with the legislation. Sometimes we get sort of paralyzed. We don't know what to do, and we don't want to make a mistake, and we don't want to do something wrong. But the worst thing that you can do, the failing grade, is inaction. All of you, whether you're a worker, you're a supervisor, or you're a manager. Inaction in response to disrespectful behavior is what tears at the morale and the integrity of the workplace. So just do something, try something, talk to something, but be part of the solution and not part of the problem. Thanks very much. It's been great.